Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. The session we are hosting today is Bridging the Gap, Creating Rich User Experiences for the Desktop, Web, and Everything in Between. This is the first in a new series of resources that we're producing based on user experience design and UX. Today we're going to be talking about responsive web design as a way to build websites that work on virtually any device. Our presenter today is Kent Raman, and he's a member of our user experience design team here at INM. Kent's worked with a number of our clients on different engagements, everything from customer-facing websites to internal productivity tools and mobile applications. Kent is really passionate about design and is driven to push the boundaries to create projects that meet business objectives while delivering a unique and effective user experience. My name's Andrea Simmons, and I'm the Marketing Director here at INM. I'm going to be your host today, and I'm going to be available throughout the session as Kent's presenting if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to bring forth. Before we get started on the content, just a couple little housekeeping items. Today's session should run about 35 to 45 minutes, and we've reserved some time at the end for questions. If anything comes to mind during the presentation, I'd encourage you to jot it down. If you look at the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, second from the bottom, there's a questions tab. You can open that up and just type in the question that you have. I'll keep an eye on those just in case anything comes in during the session that's relevant immediately, but we'll hold most of the questions to the end. If you have any issues with the audio or the content delivery in terms of speed or volume, anything of that nature, I'd love to know that. So if you could please let me know immediately in the chat window that's located at the bottom of the right-hand side of your screen. We are going to be recording the session, and it will be available on our YouTube channel, so that will be up by about the end of the week. And I'm going to send you out a follow-up email message that will give you the URL to that so that you're able to share that with any of your colleagues or friends. Excellent. So we are ready to go. So welcome to today's session. And Kent, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to start off with a familiar scenario that most of you have probably experienced, and that's you've been given a mandate for a new website or a new application. And of course, there's the dream, which is that it should be beautiful, easy to use, multi-platform, multi-device, and of course, it can't blow up your budget. So we all know that all too often, the reality is quite different. To satisfy your client's needs, often it's quite costly. You end up designing for the least common denominator, optimized content, and design for one platform. And so basically, you know, the reason why I think this has been the case is because largely to do with the tools and technology available, the way the industry has been evolving, but it also has a lot to do with the approach that we take to designing content for the web. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of detail as to the evolution of web design and where we came from and where we're going. So the web page is a carryover. The concept of a web page is a carryover from print design. And a lot of what we do as web designers, information architects, UX designers, is related to the print design medium. And a lot of the techniques and concepts have transitioned over from print into web. So what we have is an evolution of the concept of the page. In print media, the page was a physical constraint. It was something that had physical dimensions, and the content was restricted according to the size and dimensions of the page. In web, we've carried over that metaphor, and we use the browser as a representation of the page. And so there's a lot of similarities in the way the content is displayed on the web versus in print media. And that's simply because as new technologies and new mediums emerge, designers tend to carry over techniques and tools used from the previous medium into the new one. So as we transitioned from print design to web design, there was a lot of a legacy from print design that we use still to this day when we design websites. What carried over into web design and application design is the concept of a fixed constraint, the page. So what that manifests itself as in web design is the browser resolution. Basically, you decide to pick an optimal resolution, and it's generally associated with the device. And then you structure your design and your content around this resolution. So 1024 by 768 is a pretty common resolution to design for. In the early days of the web, there weren't a lot of platforms that needed to be designed for. It was predominantly desktop. So oftentimes designers could get away with simply designing for an optimal resolution, and you would more or less be able to structure your contents such that it fit the vast majority of users. There wasn't a lot of variety in desktop resolutions at the time, and so it was quite common to just design for use a fixed layout, design a website that basically has one common resolution, and then there were small margins on either side, but largely most users would be satisfied within a certain range. Now, as we progressed into the 21st century, essentially, and the emergence of smartphones, a dichotomy began to emerge, and that was between smartphones, mobile browsing, especially with the popularity of the iPhone, and desktop computing. So all of a sudden, designers, architects, visual designers now had to design effectively along two tracks. This is still a binary paradigm. There were still a fairly limited set of resolutions relative to today. So you could still get away with developing a desktop version and a mobile version, for example, for an iPhone or for your Android phone. And so this was quite common. You'd have a mobile site, for example, M.dot, which would be a completely different code. It would be designed completely differently, and then you would have your desktop site. So effectively, development was taking place in silos. Now, the problem with this is that as we advance and as technology becomes more ubiquitous, as more and more devices enter the market, we end up in a never-ending game of trying to predict what our users are doing, what devices they're using. Are they browsing on a phone? Are they browsing on a tablet? Are they browsing a desktop computer, a netbook? Designing in silos today simply is incredibly costly, and it's a never-ending game. You're restricted by, you're forced to effectively develop a whole series of separate applications, separate websites that fit very specific devices. And this can't go on forever. It's costly. It's not only that, but it doesn't account for the intermediary devices. It's not future-proof. Oftentimes the techniques used are device detection. So if you're browsing on an iPad and someone comes with a netbook, they're not going to, your website will not necessarily be able to account for that. It would detect that as a desktop computer. So this is largely tied to the technology and available and the approach to design. So how can we adapt to our present situation? How can we keep up with this infinite influx of new devices, new screen resolutions, without having to go through and add to the code a detect, a redirect for every single new device that comes along. There has to be a better way. And I'll just read you this quote from John Alsop, and this is from a List Apart article, and I thought it pretty much sums up exactly what I think we should do in terms of designing for the future. The control which designers know in the print medium and often desire in the web medium is simply a function of the limitation of the printed page. We should embrace the fact that the web doesn't have the same constraints and design for this flexibility. But first we must accept the ebb and flow of things. And I think this is spot on. Effectively, what existed prior to the current paradigm of multi devices is you could get away with this effectively having your visual design guide. Your visual design is the physical constraint, and then the content is fit around the design. And with the influx of new devices, new screen resolutions, and the unpredictability of this, this approach, I think, to design with specific browser resolutions in mind, I think is something that is becoming more and more antiquated. So what we have now is a technique called response. I think this is something that addresses this issue very, very well. It uses the latest web standards. It allows you to optimize for multiple devices and resolutions, and it also can reduce costly device-specific development. And I'll go into more detail about how this is possible and why it's important. So on being flexible, the browser window is the new page. We have traditionally viewed the web page as a fixed constraint. For example, the 960 grid is a great example of a framework or template that web designers often use and developers as a starting point to develop their designs. It's a fixed layout. It's at 960 pixels wide because that's a very, very common, not common resolution, but it's a resolution in which the vast majority of users traditionally would have fallen into. So in that sense, it was an optimal viewing area. Unfortunately, that puts us in the position of having to design the content around a fixed width. The browser window isn't fixed. It can be resized dramatically. And oftentimes, users don't browse in the full browser window. They have it slightly minimized. So you could imagine that your actual experience here is compromised. It's not taking into consideration anything except for someone who's browsing at full resolution, for example. What ended up happening was there were some clever designers that came up with, and developers, that came up with what was called a fluid grid. It was based on the 960 pixel grid. But it was slightly fluid. It could expand and contract a little bit to a certain point, but it quickly became incapable of handling the wide range of resolutions that we have today. So I'll show you an example of the fluid grid. And as you can see, this was one step in the right direction because now it has begun to address the idea that, hey, if I resize this content, I resize the browser window, maybe the content should attempt to kind of flow with the browser size. So now we have we're getting there, and so this was a great way to address the problem as newer resolutions started to emerge, as laptops became more popular, but we're still dealing with a fairly limited range of resolutions that this type of layout can handle. So for example, as I shrink this down, you'll see that the content is resizing, and that's cool, but as we approach a very, very, very small size here, you can see that this is just simply not something that's usable anymore. We have columns that are incredibly long, and I mean this layout just couldn't work. You see the text that starts to break out of the box, and so we're halfway there with this design, and I think it's important. But at the same time, what can we do? How is there a way to address? Is there a way to take this a step further? And you see, this is not an acceptable design at this resolution. So I'll give you a real-world example. That was a prototype, sort of a wireframe layout. But here's an excellent example of a website that implements a fluid grid that responds slightly. And you can see that as I resize, the sections are breaking off. However, we reach a certain point, and the search bar is overlapping the main navigation. You have your infamous horizontal scroll bar here. And you can see that the design breaks down. Now, this is nothing against the designer of this website. I think it's well designed, and but at the same time, it doesn't respond to someone. For example, if I wanted to have a Word document open on the side and browse the internet along with another window open here, I'm going to run into problems. I'm not getting the optimal user experience because I have a horizontal scroll and things are starting to break. So embracing the future. Ethan Marcotte was the developer from HappyCog that first pushed the idea of the responsive layout. And what a responsive layout does is it embraces the full flexibility of the browser window, not just at the margins. The content responds according to the size of the browser window. It allows you to have one design for multiple devices, and it's device agnostic, so there's no longer the need necessarily to have a mobile-specific device that redirects you to a new URL. You can accommodate a mobile version of your site within the same code structure as the desktop version by using a responsive layout that allows you to adjust your content depending on the size of the browser window directly. And this all happens in real time. So there's three technical ingredients behind the responsive layout, and that's using our old friend, the flexible grid, flexible images, and media queries. And without going into too much technical detail about what each of these are, what's important to know is that the combination of all three allow you to create a layout that fully responds to the browser width. So for example, a fluid grid is great up until you reach a certain breakpoint. At that breakpoint, you can use what's called a media query, which is a CSS3 property, to actually restructure the layout, to change a property, to remove a float, to change the width of a column, for example. So you can actually accomplish very, very dramatic design changes without having to use a separate style sheet, without having to redirect to a new URL, without having to have a mobile-specific site or a tablet-specific site. The browser window is what dictates the way the content is arranged. Flexible images as well, which are can be used in conjunction with media queries, allow you to resize and scale images according to the size of the browser window. This brings us to the fourth ingredient, which is a new approach to the way that we design content for the web. And that's content first, visual design to enhance the content. What responsive design does is it allows designers to emphasize the content and produce a visual design that will enhance that content rather than restrict it. So I'll give you a few examples here of a responsive web design in action. You can see here from this quick screenshot that we have 3 separate resolutions here. These are all based on the exact same code. There's no redirect, there's no mobile version. This is the exact same site. And let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. Here you can see we have a layout. Okay. Expand the screen. To adapt in real time to the browser width. So no matter what device I'm using to actually view this website, there's no device detection required. All it does is simply take the resolution of the viewing resolution, and then it adjusts and adapts the layout depending on the resolution. So if I have a massive screen here, I get the images scaled up, and my layout is designed to accommodate for that. So here you can see the buttons have gotten bigger. Everything is nice and big. This is a huge screen resolution, and we're still getting content optimized for this display. So we're getting the optimal user experience here for a massive display. There's no max. And as we reduce it, you can see that everything starts to scale down. And as we approach sort of more of a tablet size, we can see that even the navigation has changed here to be more mobile friendly. Even though I'm on a desktop computer, and I think this is important because it's device agnostic. So even though I'm on a desktop computer, if I feel like browsing something, a website at a reduced resolution, the content is adapting to that. And so you can see here how the layout has even changed for these main links. The content is reflowed to produce the best possible outcome for the size of the browser window. As I get smaller and approach mobile sizes for mobile phones, everything scales accordingly. So now if I were to view this on my mobile phone, this is the layout I would see. And you can see how with flexible images, a combination of fluid grids and media queries, we're able to intelligently program or code this website so that it responds and is flexible. This ensures that we have the optimal user experience no matter what our user decides to do with his or her browser window. And I think this is important because it's displaying content according to how the user is behaving as opposed to vice versa, where traditionally you would force the user to accommodate to the optimal resolution that you have decided to design for. And I think that ultimately we're going to have to abandon that. It's another great example. It's the 3,200 tigers. So you can see here how we started off in a reduced size. And as we scale outwards, the content will change. You see how the image, in fact, if you look at the example here versus what I'm viewing in the browser window, the banner image has been completely removed. But as we increase the browser size, the nav increases. Now we have a more optimal layout. We have an image that appears in the background. And as we pull out further and further and further, the content readapts and adjusts. And this is all happening in real time as I resize my browser. Now I'll show you an example of what can be done if we really want to push the boundaries of this. And CSS Tricks is an excellent example of media queries and responsive design effectively used in a way that makes things a little more fun, a little more fluid, and just a little more exciting. So you notice that we start out wide here. And as we reduce, the content changes rather dramatically. The boxes that are dropping off. We have things that are basically resizing, reflowing. And I apologize for the flicker, but basically here we have a design that adapts to a variety of different resolutions. And you can see that not only has the layout changed, we have the search bar that's moved from the left or from the far right to the top to accommodate mobile. We have entire sections of content. For example, the sidebars have been dropped off. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to design and to accommodate and to prioritize content. So if you're viewing this on a resolution, there's simply not enough space, there's not enough real estate to have all of the extraneous information, and so that's intelligently dropped off as you reduce the browser size. And this really puts the emphasis on the content, and it forces you to design in such a way that you have to prioritize content, what's important and what's less important, and what's the optimal display for different resolutions and different devices. So what? So I think the most important element here is that it's forcing designers to enter a phase where now we really should be developing with a content-centric, from a content-centric perspective. I don't think we have to necessarily be restrained by visual design or fixed resolution or fixed width designs any longer. We live in an era now where there's too much variety, there are too many devices to be able to define specific widths at which the content must be displayed. If you do so, you're restricting an entire group of users who will just never get an optimal experience from your site. At the same time, it reduces costly device-specific development. Oftentimes, a client wants an iPad version, wants an iPhone version, wants a desktop version of your site. Well, responsive design, while not necessarily eliminating the need to develop device-specific versions, it at least offers you an alternative. For example, if you don't have the budget to be able to develop multiple versions, multiple sites. It also future-proofs your design, because what we run into is the challenge using fixed width and even fluid width is that if you have a device, for example, the iPad that's at 1024 by 768, very soon after, Dell released a Dell Streak, for example, that's 7-inch, I believe. In any case, a whole host of intermediary devices were released, and if you're developing from a specific fixed width perspective, you're never going to be able to accommodate for these intermediary devices without developing in yet another silo, which is going to increase your cost dramatically. With responsive design, because everything is based on percentages and relative widths, you future-proofed your design from the beginning, because if an intermediary device appears, well, the content is going to scale to and reorder itself to the optimal size automatically without any thought whatsoever. It allows you also to fine-tune for a range of devices. So as you noticed in the Clear Air challenge example, as we reduced the browser width, we were able to dramatically change the navigation to something that's much more mobile-friendly, large buttons, in a layout that's familiar to most mobile users. Is this too good to be true? Well, let's find out. Discretion is advised, and I want to be very clear when I say that responsive web design is something that it's not a substitute for good design. The designer is still responsible for determining what actions are taken when the browser window hits specific resolutions. So simply making your design responsive is not going to make it usable. It's not going to necessarily be a better design. But in combination with smart planning, with a content-focused strategy, you can develop something and design something that is going to that's going to help mitigate the drastic changes in resolution from device to device, while at the same time reduce your cost. Always keep the larger business objectives in mind. Basically, if you have the budget and if the objective of your mobile site differs from the desktop version, by all means develop a mobile-only version, a mobile redirect, for example. This is very, very important. If, for example, you want your mobile users to accomplish a drastically different task than your desktop users, it may not be possible to accommodate this use case in a responsive layout. So it's very, very important. This is not something that necessarily will eliminate this is not something that will eliminate the need necessarily to develop device-specific layouts. There's still a huge demand for that. If, for example, you're a ticketing company, you want your mobile users to simply have quick access to be able to purchase tickets, whereas on your desktop site you have a more informational objective, then there may not be a solution in responsive design that's going to be able to accommodate that. However, you can still have a responsive design that's going to allow your desktop users to have the freedom to resize their browser to whatever width they want. The use of CSS3 means spotty browser support. Unfortunately, CSS3, the spec is not fully implemented yet. You're going to have to use workarounds to get the media queries working properly across all browsers. I won't mention any by name, but I'm sure we're all familiar with which browsers we're talking about here. It is possible. It's something that you can do today. It's something that you can implement and use on your projects. There are responsive frameworks and JavaScript libraries, for example, that will allow you to emulate excuse me, media query functionality. Another huge flag is large image sizes and large file sizes in general, because you have to keep in mind that even though you have a drastic difference between a smaller resolution and a wide resolution, your web page is going to load the largest file size up front. So even if you visit it on a mobile device, it's still going to download the image at its full resolution for the desktop version. So this can lead to very bloated and overweight websites if you're not careful without careful planning. Again, there are ways to mitigate this, but it's something that you should know, and it may not be ideal for your project, so take it into consideration. And again, to reiterate, device-specific experiences may still be a better solution, and the biggest one I can think of now is the touch screen versus a keyboard input, or keyboard mouse input. It may simply be the case that you can't design something that's going to be as optimal as you'd like for an iPad, for example, while at the same time making it ideal for a desktop experience as well. So with that in mind, I think it's important to take into consideration the use cases, the business objectives, and when you're using a responsive design, I think the most important thing that it brings to the table is if you are a firm or if you have a mandate for a project that may not have an enormous budget, you're unable to develop in silos for Android, iOS, iPad, a desktop computer, a netbook, all these many devices that exist on the market today. Responsive design can really help you mitigate those challenges and at least bring you closer to providing an optimal experience for all of these devices. It's not going to work in every situation, but it certainly can help, and I think as well it puts the emphasis on the content, and I think that's what's really important. So with that, that ends the presentation. I'll turn it over to Andrea, and she'll go over a few of the slides for you at the end here. Just a bit about our company.
Perfect. I think it's always good when you're doing a presentation on a specific topic to just have some background on the organization so you can understand the perspective of how we're bringing this topic forward. Integration New Media has been around for over 20 years now. We're located in Montreal. We have a team of about 25, a mix of project managers, designers, developers, and UX experts. We do all kinds of different things, but our major goal is we build solutions, digital solutions that deliver results. We're always focused on delivering different services that have a very strong focus on the specific results and business objectives that the organization is looking to accomplish. If we look at our services, we offer user interface design, UX development, prototyping, wireframing, persona development, also web development and mobile application development, whether that happens to be cross-platform or mobile-specific apps in native applications, rich internet applications, digital publishing, and customer experience design. We approach all of our projects from a very balanced triangle perspective where we focus on user experience, software engineering, and business objectives. And if you look at some of our clients, we've got clients in the publishing sector, in the entertainment sector, the utilities sector. We also work with organizations in packaged goods, music and entertainment, and the health sector as well. That's a little bit about us. If you look at the next steps in moving forward, we've also produced an e-guide on this topic, and one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to share that with any of your colleagues. We're going to be sending you a copy of that through our follow-up email message. Excuse me. And we are going to be placing the recording for the session today on our YouTube channel, so that will be available by the end of the week, and we'll make sure we share that link with you. As with any webinar, I find every time I walk away from a webinar, I suddenly have all these questions that I need to ask. So just to let you know, there are 2 email messages here at the bottom. If you have any questions that come to mind after the fact, we would encourage you to send us an email with those questions. So as I had mentioned at the beginning, we do have some time for questions. So if you have anything that you would like to ask, I would encourage you to just open up the chat window and type that in. I'm going to keep an eye on those questions. I did have a couple that came in during the session, so Kent, I definitely have a couple here for you. The first one that I had was, how can this type of technology work with my content management system? So does my CMS need to support something in order to look at responsive web design, or is this something that's just handled through CSS?
Well, there are ways that you can integrate web design with CMSs. For example, I know that there are responsive layouts available that have been tweaked and modified to integrate fairly well with WordPress, with Joomla, and other content management systems. At INM, we use CQ5, the Adobe content management platform, and we've actually successfully been able to integrate ourselves a responsive layout into our projects. So it is possible. There are some packaged solutions available online. If you want, send me an email and I can refer you the links if you like. Out of the box, just using these techniques, as you know, if you have a CMS, there's always some very specific code, there's specific behavior excuse me, that you have to accommodate for. But from what I've seen, and it's still very early on in responsive design, it's a fairly new technique, but from what I've seen, it integrates quite well. It's predominantly in the CSS, and so any content management system that gives you fairly direct access to the CSS, you'll be able to integrate responsive layouts. I know, for example, in WordPress specifically, there are already responsive themes that you can download.
That's great. You had touched a little bit on browser support. How limiting is this in terms of browser support, and what happens for users on an older browser? What would they experience?
Well, there's a couple of ways to address the browser support issue, and one of the ways is by using a JavaScript workaround framework. There are a couple that come to mind. One is called Respond.js. The other one is called Adapt.js. And both of these are, I believe, polyfills. And what they do is they basically they take the CSS3 functionality and turn it into a JavaScript code. So any browser that's capable of handling JavaScript will be able to achieve the same results. So you'll get exactly the same performance in older browsers, as long as they have robust JavaScript support. The disadvantage to this, obviously, is that it's reliant on JavaScript. So if a user has that disabled, then you're going to run into problems. How it responds if there's no functionality at all, well, or if it's unable to process the media query at all, it will respond in the exact same way that a traditional layout responds. It simply won't receive, it won't process that specific line of code that's telling it, for example, to drop off a sidebar. So what you'll see is the exact same result you would see in a traditional fluid layout or a traditional fixed width layout, in that it will either compress the content completely, like in the first example that I showed you, or you will have a horizontal scroll bar appear. So effectively, you would end up in a situation where you'd have performance comparable to what most websites do today anyways.
So it's not going to get worse.
So it's not going to get worse. No, exactly.
Okay, excellent. And the other question I had was, that came in here was, can you have an M site detect and use responsive web design at the same time? So.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and that's something that I should have been clear about that. You can. And in fact, I would say that that's probably the most ideal way, the most ideal way to go in many scenarios, because that way you get the best of both worlds. You can design a very specific mobile version that is itself responsive, and then you can have the just the regular experience for desktop users. And this is because the mechanics of it all occur in the CSS file. So if you develop a separate mobile site, it can also be, you can have your users redirect to there, and it can also be responsive because you can just include media queries in the CSS of the mobile version. So you can really, in combination with mobile sites and redirects, you can really create that fills all of the gaps, and I think it's an effective tool to use in combination with device-specific detection.
Great. Okay, well that seems to be all the questions that we have here today. So we're heading up to 11:45, which would be close to the end of our webinar. I'll just throw it out there again. If there's any last-minute questions, you can send those in. And also just to keep an eye out in your email, because we're going to be sending you a copy of that e-guide that we promised, which covers a lot of the topic we've discussed here today. And also, if you have any follow-up questions that do come to mind after the session has ended, you can jot down our email addresses and send those over to us, and we'd be happy to answer those. Okay, no additional questions, so thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. We do have a couple of other sessions scheduled on our calendar, so I'd encourage you to take a look at our website, INM.com, and you can go right off the main page and see a list of our upcoming webinars. Thanks so much for coming, and we hope to see you again at another session.